morning. I'd like to call the meeting, or good afternoon, sorry. I'd like to call the meeting to order for June 26th. It's a regular council meeting. And we'll start tonight with a moment of reflection before we get into the approval of our agendas. So we'll start with a moment of reflection now. All right, thank you very much. So for the approval of the agendas, we have a consent agenda that we'll start with. Anyone wishing to pull from the consent agenda? Otherwise, a motion to approve as presented. Councillor Wolstenholme. Motion is on the floor. There wasn't much on the consent agenda, so we'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Our regular meeting agenda. I have not heard of any additions or changes, so a motion from council to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Fox makes a motion. All in favor? Carried. And next, for the good of council, does anyone have something they'd like to share with the whole council? Typically an event that has happened, is happening. Councillor Henniger?
I just shared with some council members, but the July 12th RCMP 150th musical ride has now sold out. So that's exciting, and they'll likely open up more tickets for local, but we had a grant through the Heritage Tourism Alliance, and it definitely helped to advertise this event. So super excited, July 12th, and that'll be down at the barracks and everything, and they're opening up the barracks as well. So super exciting.
All right, anyone else? I know this weekend was a little busy with soccer tournament and the baseball tournament and the doubleheader with the Royals, I believe. So pretty eventful weekend in town again. I know soccer is pretty amazing to see. There's probably 300 to 400 people out hanging out with playing soccer, so that's always fun to see. Any other comments for the good of council? Councillor Monteith.
I would think as you're being the town representative at the fort, you'd talk about July 1st.
July 1st. Yeah, well, it's in the paper. Look, the board doesn't get too involved in it, but yeah, July 1st at the fort, there's catered lunch. So please come on down and enjoy the first musical ride of the season and the other festivities there. Anything else? If not, then we'll carry on to public hearings, of which we have two tonight. Bylaw 1973 is our first. It's a land use bylaw rezone from residential to residential multi-unit, and we'll ask our planner, Gavin Scott from ORSC, to introduce this bylaw to us tonight, and then we'll open for a public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, citizens that may be here. This evening's public hearing is on bylaw 1973. This is to redesignate a parcel of land from residential R to residential multi-unit. The location being lot 36 of block 417, plan 92B. The request has come in from the owner of the land to move to multi-unit residential. And as a reminder to council, I will let you know that your amending bylaws must be consistent with the town's statutory plans, consider the location and the proposed use. The use is being listed under the residential multi-unit, and for the most part, those are multi-unit dwellings as well as things like group care facilities. So From there, you look to your MDP, and in your MDP, there is support for such a mechanism to move to multi-unit throughout the municipality as you try to find the appropriate location and put some density into the municipality. So that's something that you should consider. This is a corner lot, so corner lots come with some things that help multi-unit. Location-wise, there's not as many neighbors, but it also comes with a secondary side setback that pushes the building in from that other secondary street. So those are things that affect the parcel, as well as the required parking. And it has been quite consistently applied that the bylaw does stand that 2 parking spaces are required for every dwelling unit. And the Development Authority has been steadfast in making sure that happens, so that each design does provide the parking on site. If you have any further questions, I would be ready to answer. Otherwise, it's open to the public to provide comment.
All right, so I think we'll open the public hearing first, and we'll start by asking for a motion from council to open the public hearing for bylaw 1973. Councillor Fox makes the motion. I'll call it the question. All in favor? Motion carried. So this is a public hearing for bylaw 1973, which is to rezone lands from residential to residential multi-unit. A public hearing is an opportunity for anyone wishing to speak for or against this bylaw to be able to come to the mic. If you would, state your name, whether you're for or against the bylaw, and then you can state your case as well. So
It's working.
very good.
My wife and I, we live on lot 35 on the east side of that vacant lot. Looking at. Fourplex, 4-unit condo or a 1-story 2 condo.
Okay, opposed. So, okay, thank you, Alan. And so this is a rezoning from residential regular to residential multi-unit. The details of the construction and development itself is not something we deal with at this time. That's something that would go to MPC for them to be able to consider. Regarding the contamination, that's not something we would deal with in this decision either. The contractor or the building permit authority. The height restrictions are all based on what's allowable, not allowable, based on the land use bylaw, which would also be taken care of in the land use MPC. Parking would also be MPC because that's when they would present their development permit. So, and for this zoning, I believe multi-unit would be, correct me if I'm wrong, Gavin, that's 4 units or more? Or is it 3, 2 units or more? Okay. So that does not mean it's going to be more than 2 necessarily. It could be 2, could be 3, could be 4. But that's something, yeah, up to 2 before. So you are voicing your concerns against this bylaw tonight, correct? Okay. Okay, anyone else wishing to speak for or against bylaw 1973?
My name is Bill Hall. I am against this zoning of bylaw 1973. I feel there's too many residential multi-units being developed in this town now. On this particular lot, that's 4 to 8 units of parking, which could be a concern. I just want to go on record as being against this, and I also want to encourage residents to voice their opinions in these forums, or else they're not going to be heard.
Sure. Any other questions from council for our planner? Sorry, just from council, sorry. Councilor Monteith?
Do we know what's planned for this lot?
No. Gavin, council.
We got very little detail on this. There was one drawing provided where the building did cover the entire lot, and the applicant was encouraged not to submit that with his development application should he be successful tonight.
I have trouble rezoning in residential areas if I don't know what's going in there. Like, it's fine in, lots that are empty and out. But when you're in a residential area, without knowing what's going in, you hate to rezone it because you don't know what's down the line. So that worries me a bit.
I think that's a challenge because you have the land use that's in question, but then after that's a development, and we don't deal on development. So unless we're going to go to direct control, I don't think we can require them to present what they're going to build on the property unless, yeah, perhaps Gavin, you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it is a difficult question because even if they did present you something tonight, they could change their mind and submit something different to the MPC and you would not have a say over that process. It is a consideration as I muddle through your land use bylaw and try to bring something back regarding this question as to whether or not the districts for residential should be set up on densities as a precursor to, and that would give council an understanding of what the full density is. But that may mean that you need more categories for multi-unit because right now it's 2 to whatever. And if it's based on the 66 foot by 99 foot lot, yeah, we are getting into the position sometimes where council isn't well informed as to the intent of the applicant. We just did the ones down on the 8th or 9th there, and they're quite dense and one lot had to be eliminated for parking. So these things do come up, and they are a question that I do listen when you're saying that this is a problem for council to decide whether or not this is an appropriate location. So there is a solution in the works. We'll see whether or not council appreciates that when it comes forward.
Councilor Nagbos?
Under the current zoning, they're allowed to have 2 units, correct? A
As
duplex.
a permitted use.
So we can assume that they're looking for more than 2.
Yes, because they would have it currently. The current proposed change would also allow that same density, as well as a permitted use up to 4 units, and then beyond the 4 units, that becomes discretionary.
But based on just kind of a process of elimination, we're looking at a rezoning, and that they will probably put in an application for 3 or more.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further comments from a planner's perspective, whether this is suitable for that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been seeing these applications come forward. Planning has encouraged them to be on corners, but we have not delved into exact densities. And again, that's a numbers game having to do with the development style as it comes forward and whether it can fit on the lot. Now, the applicant may be surprised when it comes around that they don't get the density they desire, that density gets reduced based on the required parking and based on the required setbacks.
Okay. Alan, I seen you had your hand up. Did you have one last question?
Back this gentleman over here, I'm against that rezoning. It's fine with a duplex, but a fourplex, I'm totally against.
Okay. And Bill, did you have your hand up as well?
I just want to go on the record of saying that the town is now, with the bylaw 1970, 1961, you've opened up a whole can of worms because now these lots are going to be, these people are going to ask to have them rezoned so they can get the tax incentive.
That plays a role, but only if it's 4 unit or more, correct?
Correct.
Yes. No, yeah. It would need to be rezoned in order to get the incentive.
Correct, but you would have to spend in excess of whatever the construction is for a 3-plex or larger to actually become, to apply for that incentive. It's not just the rezoning in and of itself that makes you eligible for that incentive.
Okay. Any other questions from Gavin, council for Gavin tonight? And I've seen there's no one else in the gallery. Our procedures does allow an individual to speak once for or against a matter, but we've offered it twice now. So on that end, I will request a motion from council to close the public hearing for bylaw 1973. Councilor Nagbos makes the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. And moving into bylaw 1967, a McLeod Landing debenture bylaw, and we'll ask our Director of Finance, Chris Holbeck, to introduce this to us.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. Good evening, Council. Tonight, bylaw 1967, the McLeod Landing debenture bylaw is back on Council's agenda. We did first reading May-ish. Sorry, I wasn't here for it. I missed it. And it has gone through the process of advertising in the newspaper. And tonight is a public hearing on that debenture. So this debenture is our financing debenture for phase 1 of the McLeod Landing subdivision project. It is the capital project itself for McLeod Landing phase 1 is probably about a $6.22 million project. The town has reserves that we have saved up for 50% of that cost. And the other half of the cost is going to be debentured through the government of Alberta. So the debenture tonight is for $3,110,500. The term is a 15-year repayment. And in my submission, Mayor Fairder caught it. He did some math, and the annual cost of this debenture to the land sale department is not the $146,245 principal and interest, because we pay 2 payments on our loans every year, so it's double that. So it's 292,000-ish. But that was all in my calculations. I just didn't have it in my report, the total for the 2 payments each year. I don't have much else to say about it. We're going to do second and third reading after this, and then we continue on with the process. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Can I ask for a motion from council to open the public hearing for bylaw 1967? Councillor Fox makes the motion. Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. So being a bylaw for a debenture bylaw 1967 for McLeod Landing, is anyone in the audience wishing to speak for or against this debenture bylaw? I'll ask again, anyone wishing to speak for or against bylaw 1967? And a third time, anyone wishing to speak for or against bylaw 1967? I will request a motion from council to close the public hearing for bylaw 1967. Councillor Poitras makes a motion. All in favor? Motion carried. So that concludes the public hearings for tonight. We will move over to consideration of the public hearings that we just had. And we'll start with bylaw 1973, a land use bylaw rezone. We had the public hearing. We've passed first reading. I will request a motion from council to open for second reading of this bylaw. And after that, we can debate and discuss the bylaw before resolving whether we go to second or third reading. Anyone prepared to make a motion for second reading on bylaw 1973? Councillor Henniger makes the motion. All right, so the motion is on the floor. This is a land use bylaw rezone from residential to residential multi-unit. Is there any discussion among council regarding this bylaw or further questions for administration? Councillor Butchers?
Yeah, just as a point of clarification, as currently zoned, this lot would be able to accommodate a duplex, 2 units as zoned.
I'll defer to our planner, Gavin Scott, to confirm. My question would be also, is 3 units a discretionary use?
In the current zoning, the discretionary use B, which goes to MPC, would only allow 2 units. The bigger impact in density, though, would be a group care facility of up to 5 residents. And that's the existing zoning.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Butchers? Any other questions? Clarifying questions, debate, discussion?
I thought we just were allowed to ask questions, but in regards to discussion, I've seen a few of these duplexes go up on corner lots. I'm not sure if we've seen any in middle lots in this town. While I'm not opposed to duplexes, I feel that rezoning sporadically to multi-use is not as attractive as 2 units on a residential parcel. We clearly see an intent here for 3 units, and I feel that we could do this, but I don't think this would necessarily do the neighborhood a positive. And for that reason, I would be opposed to this. I would I would like to keep it to a duplex if at all possible with the current zoning. I just feel that if we start infilling multi-residential in this community, we're gonna have a mess. So that's why I'm opposed to this.
Councillor Wilson?
I agree with Councillor Van Hugenbos. I just don't think it's a good idea to go up a couple of stories. Just a duplex would be fine, but leave it at that.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Henniger?
Just looking at that street as well, and every unit on that street right now, it would probably stand out pretty aggressively if it was a 3-unit. Again, I don't know what, we're talking rezoning, and I really have appreciated that process with Gavin and hearing that over the last year or so. Is like we are focusing on rezoning, and MPC will be the ones who ultimately determine the parking, what can go on that lot. But again, that lot has been vacant from just my Google search for a while. It's been vacant for a while, but it doesn't mean we just need to slap something on it right away to fill it. I think it needs to be done properly. Again, we're talking rezoning tonight.
Very well. Any other comments?
I do have a question. Is the rear yard setback the same on multi-res as residential? 25, I believe it's 24 something for residential.
Yes, it's 24 feet.
Okay.
24 feet on either zoning?
In the rear, yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, debates, position statements? Councillor Monteith?
I'm not really in favor of the development, but I really would like to see something on that lot. The lot itself is not very attractive, and it would sure be nice to infill some of these lots with development, but I'd sure like to know what's going on before I would vote to rezone that one.
I think the challenge is we do have duplexes on residential districts in the community currently, and in districts that are newer as well, but we don't have precedents for anything more than that in a residential zoned area, so it becomes a bit of a challenge. I know we've denied an application in the past for multi-unit mid-block. I'm definitely a lot more in favor of something at the end of a block, as was stated. It has more opportunities for, parking or even the looks of it, but it's still a small lot, so anything more than a duplex, I find it's a bit of a struggle to put on the 66 by 99, especially a corner lot. I definitely hesitating on this bylaw for sure. Any other comments? Anyone? If there's no other comments or questions from council, then the motion is on the floor. And this is a motion for second reading of bylaw 1973 to rezone from residential to residential multi-unit. And we'll call it to question. All in favor? All opposed? Motion is defeated. All right. That concludes the agenda item for bylaw 1973. We will move on now to bylaw 1967, which is our McLeod Landing debenture. Thank you, Planner Gavin Scott, for coming tonight. And anyone wishing to make a motion for second reading of bylaw 1967? Councillor Henniger makes a motion. Motions on the floor. Any further discussion, questions on this bylaw? Councillor Van Hagemas?
We're self-funding 50%, 3.1 million out of reserves. While I'm not opposed to that, naturally, do we have some sort of mechanism where we internally track the what's the term, to fill up essentially this reserve in the form of $3.1 million on this specific project? Or is that not, are we more focused on making sure our debenture payment is serviced by land sales instead of the reserve being built back up?
So if council remembers, the Southwest Industrial Project that we did phase one a few years ago, we borrowed some money from the internal financing capital reserve, and council determined that we would pay it back. So we have an amount in our annual budget that repays that reserve for over 25 years for the amount that we borrowed for that Southwest Industrial Phase 1 project. We did not do that with McLeod Landing. We are going to talk in September about reserves and how we fund them, if we fund them at budget time, if we wait till the end of the year and divvy up the surplus and hope for land sales, that kind of a thing. So no, we are, there is no planning to refund that reserve right now, but we will be talking about that in September because we would like to have an ongoing internal financing reserve for the future.
Thank you. I think what I'm trying to get across, what I'm trying to say is, do we have a net amount, a net deficit on the cost of this project? So if we look at the project and what the potential revenue on land sales would be versus total cost of this project, that would be the amount that either comes straight out of reserves or comes out of general revenue through our assessment or grants, etc. That amount is the amount that is, to me, the biggest concern, because the rest would eventually pay for itself. The project pays for itself. So do we have that, on a project this scale, have we looked into that, and are we tracking that on what the cost is versus what will generate and the difference? Because that difference is what could potentially increase our operating for 15 years, because that amount will be debentured, or sorry, not that amount, but that is the amount that, to me, matters in relation to, generating that revenue. That's the difference. So is that something we're tracking?
So we did do a payback analysis on this project to see when, if everything got sold and the property taxes came in for each of those developments, what the payback period for this project would be. I haven't looked at that in a while. I didn't have it with me, but we did do a payback period just to kind of figure out when we would have everything paid back. But maybe Anthony's got, maybe the CAO has more than information than what I have, or I don't think Adrian's got anything.
Right. I believe we're going to pay it back in 15 years. That's what the debenture is for.
And I'm sorry, I'll just step in here for a second. I do know that Anthony does have a spreadsheet, and it's based on land sales, tax revenue, and that time frame that they're talking about. I just unfortunately don't have those here, but he does have a spreadsheet, and I believe it was kind of discussed slightly when you guys were talking about potential lot prices out there, and if those haven't been approved officially, then that will be part of that discussion as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry. All right, thank you. Any other comments on second reading of bylaw 1967? Motion is on the floor. If there's no further comments, we can call to question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. And request for third reading. Motion for third reading. Councillor Fox makes a motion. Any further discussion on this debenture bylaw 1967? Seeing none, we'll call to question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. The bylaw 1967, the debenture bylaw from McLeod Landing, has been carried. Moving on then to new business, we have 5 items tonight. Bylaw 1975 is our first one, and our designated officer, or Chris Holbeck, our Director of Finance, would like to introduce this bylaw to us.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. Tonight, council is looking at bylaw 1975, the designated officer bylaw. I put in some information regarding why we need a designated officer bylaw. We have many bylaws that we have written in the town of Fort Macleod that have sections that talk about designated officers under that bylaw and the power that they have under that bylaw. And we don't have a bylaw that specifically states which position in our organization is the designated officer under that section of the Municipal Government Act. So we kind of have a loose end there. So we were talking about some changes to our payables and how we pay vendors, and that we're looking at some more electronic methods. And I spoke to some other communities, and they mentioned that they have an option of any 2 individuals listed in the bylaw can sign a check or sign off payables. So it doesn't always have to be the CAO and a counselor. So both Lisa and I are able to sign for the town too, and in a pinch we'll sign checks. So we wrote the new designated officer bylaw. All the people who are designated officers within the Municipal Government Act have been listed with their duties in the section in the Act. And then there's a part in the bylaw where we just kind of gave a little bit of, it's section number 3. It talks about authorizing municipal documents. So we have kind of broadened it and gave it a little bit of flexibility. So now it says all agreements, checks, and other negotiable instruments and the opening and closing of accounts that hold money shall be signed by any 2 of the following. So it's the mayor, the deputy mayor, a counselor, the CAO, the director of finance, and the director of community and protective services. So it just gives a little bit of flexibility. Council sets a budget every year. You guys see the budget. I bring you quarterly reports. I give you a check listing at every meeting. So I don't think there should be any concerns about if the CAO and Lisa or myself and a counselor sign a check. So it's the bylaw is to tighten up those loose ends on designated officers, but it also has that new section about approving municipal documents. That's a little bit of a change because right now it's the mayor and the CAO, or a counselor and the CAO are the only ones who can double sign things. All right, I will take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anyone prepared to make a motion for first reading on bylaw 1975? Councillor Fox makes the motion. Any discussion or questions for administration first on this, Councillor Monteith?
Excuse me, I can see expanding it, but I have a bit of problem where we get 2 administration signing it or 2 councillors signing it or whatever. I would prefer to see 1 administration and 1 councillor signing it all, because ultimately we're on the hook. And if we're conceivably never seeing any checks, even though we see checklists, I don't really think that's as strong as control as it could be.
Chris, did you want to provide some response to that?
So I will just do just a general response to that. Other than probably some counselors, I don't know if people really take a hard look at what they're signing for a lot of the time. I think you have to have some confidence and some trust in your administration. We have, procedures in place and policies in place to ensure no collusion between a couple of administration people or a couple of counselors. I think we're all trustworthy, and where we're not trustworthy, there are procedures and processes and policies and bylaws in place, and auditors who check our work. They don't look for fraud. I look for fraud if I need to. I'm pretty, type A, a little bit uptight, town's money, let's, make sure we know where everything is. And I don't think it's a good use of counselors' time to be coming in and signing a check that I've looked at, that staff has looked at, that the CAO has signed off on. Is there really, it's wonderful, and if you want to spend your time in here signing checks, that's great. But I mean, when you guys are away or we don't want to drag you in when you're working, it would be nice just to be able to have a couple of administration people sign off some negotiable instruments. Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments, questions on that? Councillor Monteith?
I don't think it's a matter of trust. I think it's just a matter of control. So, I would be against this, even though I have no concerns about anyone. You never know who's going to be down the road, which is always a concern. I just think it's good control, and so I would be in favor of that.
Okay, I had a question regarding banks. Do banks use this then to determine who the signing authorities are, or because I think right now it's regulated by the banks that one needs to be a counselor and one needs to be admin, or no?
So if this was passed, this bylaw, then I would send it to the bank with a notice of instruction that any two of these 7, 8, 9, 10 positions can sign the checks. And then the auditors look at that during the audit too, to just see if something's changed.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah. No, I forgot what I said. I have no problem with broadening it so more people can sign. I think that's a good idea. But I have a tendency to agree with Jim, and this has nothing to do with trust. I just think it's important that a councillor or mayor have a look at the check. And I think Chris is probably right. Sometimes some of the councillors and mayors, or mayor doesn't always look at every one. I shouldn't say that because I don't know what they're doing, but I still like the idea of 1 and 1. Thank you.
Councillor Van Eylos?
Yeah, I think it has to do with principle more than trust as well. You're not looking at the check because there's no relevant backup information as to what you're actually paying for, who the provider is, etc. So you're putting your signature down there. But I think it's just the principle of who signs, and unless it's a serious problem, which I'm not hearing, I would like to keep it the same. Which I would be voting in favor of keeping it the same.
Any other comments? Councillor Butchers?
I would agree. I think when I went over this, my feeling was, is this kind of like shirking our responsibility here with this? But I'm also all for efficiency of operation. So I guess my question is this a practice that is governed by the MGA, and is it commonly used throughout other communities to have two administrators be able to sign checks?
I think it's left to the municipality. Yeah, definitely. I know Claire's Home does it this way because we talked to them about their designated officer bylaw, and we used that as our template. And then we saw that they had that section in theirs, And Anthony and I decided maybe that would be a way to give some flexibility so that if no one's around, or if, you know, it's a one-off check, it can just be like 2 members of administration. And maybe it's, I don't know if it's a good use of your time to be coming in and signing things for $15. I don't know if it's a dollar value, or if you just want to come in and be the co-signer council on all checks and all, because we do have certain things where it has to be the mayor signing. So any kind of a land sale agreement or anything, or tax incentive agreements, it has to be the mayor and another, the CAO normally. Normally it's the mayor and the CAO. So, I mean, if that's kind of what you want, is it's going to be a councillor or the mayor, and someone from administration is the second signatory, then that's the way we'll run it.
Yeah, personally, I don't see a problem with this. I think there's enough controls in place, and I would agree when you're going through the checks, unless you're looking through the invoice and really double checking that it is what it's supposed to be. It's been through, I don't know how many checks before it got to that point already. At some point, there's too many checks to sign even, or to look through. I can imagine a city the size of Lethbridge or Calgary, you can't have what we're proposing. That would be a really bad use of energy and time, I would say. I'm not saying we're at that size, but I think we have enough administration and controls in place that there should be no risk of anything going amiss without a council signing a check. So I'd be in favor of making the change, but if council needs to compromise and we adjust make a friendly, not a friendly amendment, but we can have a motion from council to change the bylaw to adjust so we can do 3 readings tonight, because I think we do want to have a designated officer's bylaw. But yeah, any other comments on this? Yes.
On Anthony's behalf, yes, I would request that if we are going to, that we don't defeat first reading, that we make amendments to it, adjust an amount if we want an amount, so that if it's over a certain amount of money, it has to be a councillor signing the check with administration. But the designated officer part of this, not just the check signing piece, is important for process. And so I would hope that we can come to an agreement on the check signing piece.
Yeah. Right, but we can pass first reading and then bring it back at a future council meeting for second and third, but that's pushing it into, well, I guess we'll have 1 meeting in July, right? And then 1 in August? They have requested that, but worst case, if we need it to go back for an amendment, then we can do that too. But do you have a recommended, does anyone want to make a motion to amend bylaw 1975 to make it more palatable that we can vote on, and then after that we can carry on with Councillor Monteith?
I would make the motion that one of administration and one of council sign.
Okay. So the motion to amend bylaw 1975 is on the floor, and basically the amendment would detail that for check signing, it would require 1 from council and 1 from administration. Anyone wishing to speak for or against the amendment to the bylaw?
Is there a interest to have a discussion on the dollar value? Because as a friendly amendment to the amendment, I think there's something to be said about that we're not getting stuck in a rut over anything below $2,500, for example. And that's just a number that popped in my head. It could be 1,000. If you look at the payables in the consent agenda, that's something that I'd be open to having a discussion on.
I'll ask our Director of Finance, Chris Holbach, she has a comment.
I just want to remind council that probably 95% of how we make payments now is electronic funds transfers. And by the time you get that documentation, it's gone. I've paid them. So just so you know that, we hardly ever write a check anymore. We make large electronic transfers and we usually process and pay within a day. And sometimes council, we're waiting for a counselor, we're waiting to bring it to council. So just so you know, checks is like the smallest part of what we do, and the electronic funds transfer is the biggest, and we don't hold that stuff up to get you guys in to sign that stuff. That stuff is processed and paid to our suppliers in a timely manner. So.
Councillor Monteith, did you have a comment to that?
I understand that, and I don't have a problem with that, but at least somebody on council is looking at it, and I think that's important.
Looking at which, sorry,
Looking at the documentation and looking at the disbursement.
and making an initial on the disbursement.
That's right.
Councillor Venables?
Other than the list of payables, the EFTs are not made privy to a counselor signing 5 checks when there was 50 total payments, correct? It's just the list of payables that shows where the funds have gone. So these electronic transfers, they're not authorized by a member of council. You just said you pay them.
Okay, no, they're authorized.
They're
After
all
the fact,
authorized?
But they're all authorized.
Sorry, when you say after the fact.
The money's already left our bank.
Right, so what authorization is given for that money to leave the account? That's my question. Are we, we're discussing 95% of payments. We're actually discussing a friendly amendment to an amendment on 5% of our payments. Is that what we're doing here? Because 95% of them are made by electronic transfers, which council's not technically involved in.
That's what she's saying, yes.
So then I don't understand the purpose of this discussion.
Of which discussion?
If 95% of our payments are done electronically without council consent, then where's the oversight in that? If it's about oversight, then we need to have a bigger discussion.
Yes, Chris?
Okay, I'm jumping back in. So you guys get the check listing on the consent agenda, and it's pretty close to the same thing that you're signing when you come in to sign off the EFT cover page. I mean, if you wanted to ask questions about a $700,000 payment to a contractor, then you would pull it off the consent agenda and we could have a conversation about it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just spinning in circles now, so sorry.
No, we're not spinning in circles. So I'm all for the information making its way to a set of eyes or 2 sets of eyes, sorry. But if we're making the payment before approval, because this discussion is about approval, then if 95% of all our payments are made pre-approval, essentially, if it was about approval, then I would have no problem with any 2 signing, seeing as we're already doing that on 95% of our transactions. Now, that a councillor or mayor still gets this information as to payments that went out is an accountability aspect. Like it's not about the money leaving the account, it's about the transparency. Am I correct? And if it's about transparency, then maybe this should be forwarded to all of council, which it is through the consent agenda, but it's not like we're approving this.
It's more information for us to review and consider, and if we have any concerns, to raise it with administration.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So the motion to amend is on the floor. Is there any further discussion on the amendments?
Sorry, Brent, I think we need to pass first reading, and then if you want to amend before second reading to include any changes, that's
Okay.
probably the easiest and clearest way to do it, because the first motion was just about moving first reading.
First reading, we have to do it before second reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've not done this before. It's pretty interesting.
So I think you have to
Thanks,
do
Jamie.
first reading first, if you're comfortable with everything, and then before
Okay.
second reading, you note the changes you want made, and then make second reading with those changes.
And so then we'd request a friendly withdrawal of the motion that's on the floor by Councillor Monteith.
The very first motion was just to move first reading. So you can move first reading and then continue with amendments before second reading.
Do we not have to deal with the amendment first? Motion to amend?
To deal with the first motion first before we can, well,
No, I think you always have to deal with the amendment before you can get back to the original. We can do that. So a motion for first reading of bylaw 1975 is on the floor. It's for a first reading. We'll kindly defer the amendment to after first reading, the motion for first reading of bylaw 1975. So if there's no further discussion on that, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. So that's first reading of bylaw 1975. So you're suggesting here, Lisa Gillingham, that we now,
That if there's any changes that you want, you discuss them now, and then you make the second reading motion with mention of the changes that you'd like.
and if that gets defeated, because we need a motion to amend, because we don't want to defeat a second reading motion. Yeah, we've not done this before, so, so I'm just wondering, because technically I think we need to do second reading and then have a motion to amend. And if that amendment passes, then we go to second reading with the amendment. If the amendment doesn't pass, we go back to second reading as though there was no amendment.
I think that's correct.
Yeah. So I'll request a motion to go to second reading on bylaw 1975. Councillor Hanniger makes the motion. So the motion on the floor for second reading of bylaw 1975. And we can have some discussion on bylaw 1975 currently, and if anyone would like to now make a motion or move the motion over, a motion to amend, then we can do that now. Councillor Monteith.
I would make the motion to amend to have one administration and one councillor sign.
With no financial limitation for that at all, correct?
I would say that, yes.
Okay, there is a motion to amend. We've had some discussion from Councillor Van Agbos. Previous to this, we've had some feedback from our Director of Finance. Any more discussion, debate on the amendment to bylaw 1975? Councillor Fox has a question.
So when we get the information in the consent agenda, have those payments already gone out then, before we see it in the consent agenda?
Yes, unless I've brought you checks to sign tonight, the EFTs are gone. So the electronic funds transfers are gone.
Okay, Councillor Pudges.
Another question for you, Chris. So this amendment as presented, does it change the way you operate at all at this point from what we've been currently doing?
It does not. We have a counselor, either the mayor or a counselor always do the second signature on the checks and the EFTs. Kind of as a side note, we're looking at digitizing, doing more digitization within our accounts payable module. It's kind of beside the point. We'll get there someday. So it involves Laserfiche and moving invoices here and there and approvals all within the software and electronically. So I don't know what that means for any of this, but I just thought I'd bring it up.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we're not making things more difficult for you with any of this amendments or anything.
No, and it doesn't make it more difficult for us. I mean, if push comes to shove and we need a check out the door and we can't find a counselor, then if it's the CAO and I will sign it, or the CAO and Lisa will sign it, or two of us will sign it to get it gone, if it's a one-off. We don't like to do that. We don't do it all the time because our procedure is to have a counselor and a senior admin member sign those items. But we do it. So just so you know, just full disclosure.
Will this amendment then prevent you from doing that?
Yes. Yes, it will. So, because now we're spelling it out.
Right.
So we're saying one counselor, one senior staff. So, and really, I just don't know if it's a good use of your time to come in and be signing these things. I don't know if it's adding value, it just gives you comfort. And I'm not saying it to say, stay away. That's, you decide what your role is and your level of involvement in the day-to-day things that we do, and we are just pleased to have you all.
Okay, thank you.
Very nicely said. That answers your question. Councillor Van Hagerbos?
Just as a follow-up, to me, it's, if we do it for accountability, for trust, for principle, I'm not opposed to that. Or if we don't do it for any of those reasons and we think it's just efficient to have two staff members sign, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. But the fact that 95% of the payments are going out without any council oversight, other than you're made aware and you sign, you initial that you're made aware, is for me the stumbling block. We're having discussion about procedure on something that we can only implement to 5% of our process. Makes no sense.
Okay, so you're
I
voicing
don't
your
understand.
opinion in favor of the amendments or against amendment?
The amendment made sense to me until we had our discussion as to the fact that 95% of our payments were made via electronic means without any council oversight. That's where this went out the window for me.
Okay. I think it's quite common, even in business world or larger organizations, where this process does have to change at some point, because otherwise you have mayor, council members stumbling over signing checks or CEO of a company, and it doesn't work at some point. Because first of all, we don't know the numbers. All we're doing is saying, yeah, it looks like a legitimate vendor, and we're saying, okay. We're not really looking at the numbers the way we should and the way administration is already. So for that reason, I'd vote against the amendment. If we have a larger discussion on accountabilities and the approval process, that's something that's kind of comes under a different discussion piece, I believe. Any other discussion? So we'll call question the amendment, and essentially that will say whether that amendment will be included in our second and third reading or will not be included. And if this motion fails, then we'll go to the second reading of the bylaw. And if we can't get unanimous consent for third reading, then we'll have to postpone third reading to a future council meeting. So I will now request, call the question, the amendments to bylaw 1975, and I'll call the question now. All in favor? All opposed? So that amendment is carried. All right, so now we are going to second reading of bylaw 1975, including the amendment. And we will the motion's already on the floor. The motion's on the floor, but it's not been voted on. Yep. All right, any further discussion on the bylaw? And I think there's a lot more to the bylaw than just the signing authorities. I think it makes sense to me to have pretty clear on who is designated for what, when. And I was curious how this bylaw will be referenced in all the other bylaws that might include a designated officer in the other bylaws, or how do we know to keep both updated, I guess? Because before we never had a designated officer bylaw, so I'm just wondering how we're gonna know that's,
Well, I think now that we have a designated officer bylaw, it has to go through like an annual or biannual process where you make sure that all of the places in the MGA that talk about designated officers are in this bylaw. And usually what Miranda and I have done as records management team is we went through all the bylaws, searched them for any of the bylaws that say designated officer. So that's how we cross-reference them. The individual bylaws such as the community standards bylaw, that kind of thing, they have definitions that talk about designated officers, but they don't say who that is. This bylaw says who that is.
okay. So it should all pull itself together quite well. Okay. Any further discussion on bylaw 1975? Seeing none, we'll call the motion of second reading with amendments to question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. And I'll request a motion from council then, if we want to go to third reading. We need unanimous consent. So anyone prepared to make a motion to go to third reading on this bylaw? Councillor Wolstenholme makes the motion. And I'll call it the question. All in favor? Motion is unanimously carried. And requesting a motion for third reading of bylaw 1975. Councillor Monteith makes the motion. Motion's on the floor. Any further clarifying questions? This will include the amendments. I'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Well, that was a nice round robin. Thanks, everyone. Carrying on to new business item number 2. It's an operational policy number 18. Memorial Bench and Tree Program Policy, and we'll ask our Director of Operations, Adrian Pedro, to speak to this one.
Good evening, Council. So as the Mayor had indicated, this is Operations Policy number 18. We do intend to keep growing that list, so we're just pumping them out here. This one's fairly straightforward, so this is in response to requests we've received over the years to plant a memorial bench or a memorial tree throughout the town. Now, historically, we haven't had any parameters around what that program looks like, so the goal of this program is to assign those parameters. And as you will see, we do provide some costs for each of the programs, the tree being $1,000 and then the bench being $1,500. And so that would include the town purchasing and installing either one of those two. And then the location would also be governed by the town at the end of the day. The applicant does have the option of choosing, but we would determine final location. And yeah, it's fairly straightforward. At the end of the day, the town is ultimately responsible for that bench. So outside of, and responsibility would lie for the town for sort of regular wear and tear. If there is some sort of vandalism or major damage, then that would be a discussion with the applicant there. So yeah, I will take any questions.
Very good. Any questions for Director of Operations? Councillor Monteith?
So this has nothing to do with the cemetery.
It does apply to the cemetery as well. So the cemetery does have more strict criteria for benches, but it would be applicable for within the cemetery or around town in general.
Is there, like the price itself, like is that reviewed every few years? Because I imagine that 1,000 to 1,500 can go up.
For sure, and that's based on the bench specifically. That's based on our recent cost to purchase about 4 benches. I think it was a year and a half, close. And so for sure, we would have to review that as the costs go up or down, however they may go. But that bench cost also includes the concrete pad that ultimately would need to be installed for that bench as well.
Yeah. Great. Any further questions? We don't approve the policy, we essentially are accepting as information and then it gets submitted. So this is our opportunity to provide feedback if we want to enhance, adjust, or what have you to this policy. So if there is no further questions or discussion, a motion to accept this policy as information. Councillor Fox makes a motion. Any further questions, debates? If there is none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Moving on then to item 3, hotel feasibility study. And being our CAO is not here tonight, we'll ask Lisa Gillingham, our Director of Community Services, to speak to this.
Thank you. I'll do my best to speak to this as I just read the submission this morning, knowing that Anthony was going to be away. So there has been conversation with the Chamber of Commerce in the past few months, as well as many residents expressing an interest and a desire to have a brand name, larger, newer hotel in Fort Macleod. Some people think there's enough business and traffic that it would be valuable. We do know that most of our hotels are aging, and that's just kind of comes with the age of our town as well. In partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, so they suggested a feasibility study before anybody or if a developer were to come in and ask about it, and that we could partner with the Chamber and have that feasibility study done and ready for developers should they want to look into it a little bit further. So our motion tonight is to ask that council approve a consultation and appraisal proposal by Cushman and Wakefield for a hotel market study. I would like to add to the motion, though, after speaking to Anthony a little bit more detail, that the motion includes, in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, up to a maximum of $6,000. It is going to be a 50-50 split for the cost of this with the Chamber, and Anthony figured that up to $6,000 would be enough to cover that 50-50 cost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here prepared to make a motion as per the recommendation?
So moved.
Councilor Naglos makes the motion. Any other questions, comments? Councilor Van Albus?
When we first, when this was first brought to our attention, the chamber had not had discussion on the issue or the matter. I believe they had a meeting on Friday, or am I wrong on that?
They had a meeting last week, Wednesday afternoon. And
do we know
voice
what
support?
they voiced support for
Yes,
this? Okay.
absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I think there could be other grant dollars that would really look at this, whether it's a grant from Tourism Alberta or even other local economic development authorities that might provide some funds to this as well.
I should have mentioned that as well. Anthony did say that they are investigating grants. They haven't found anything yet. He did meet with a lady from Travel Alberta today too. She's going to look into a couple of things and kind of see, but she says the time is right, and the feasibility study would be excellent for developers.
So I know that at maximum 6,000, it might end up being that we can get it all covered, but at least the town can get it moving along in process. So the motion's on the floor. Any further discussion, questions, debates? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Alberta Municipalities Conference 2023, and I would imagine Lisa Gillingham would speak to this one as well.
Sure. As past practice, we typically bring this to council to approve council members and administration attending the AUMA well, it's not called AUA anymore, Alberta Municipalities Conference. This is one that's held annually, rotates between Calgary and Edmonton, and any members of council, and then usually a couple senior administration attend based on schedules and availability. So we'd just like to have it on the books that council approves, and the motion is there for you for 6 council members and administration to attend the 2023 Alberta Municipalities Convention. That's in September in the Edmonton Convention Center.
Very well. And just clarifying question 6 is because someone has already said they can't go. Is that correct? I mean,
I won't be able to attend. I just have a work item that day.
okay. So, anyone prepared to make a motion as per the recommendation? Did we want to include it up to 7 just in the event Councillor Hanniger can attend? Because otherwise we have to come back, right? Pardon me? All right, anyone prepared to make a motion for up to 7 council members and administration as Councillor Monteith makes the motion? It's in Edmonton this year, September 27 to 29. There is some pre-convention training as well on the 26th, if anyone's interested in that. So motions on the floor, any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Moving on to item 5, a local film sponsorship request, and our Director of Community Services would like to speak to this one as well.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of visiting with Natasha Hurlbert, used to be Yorkison, a longtime community member. She is interested in starting and making a short film in Fort Macleod. She has, my understanding is that she has written it. This is her project, and she is bearing most of the costs, and she's got some good people and some good support. She's using people from the union out of Calgary to help put the production on. She is looking for sponsorships and donations to help fund that a little bit, and she did come to the town asking for some donations, or the sponsorship letter is also included in that. One of the ways that Anthony and I talked about was the in-kind donations, and that it's much easier for us to waive facility fees than to actually hand over money. So we've talked about the application fee potentially being waived for the film application. The pool fee, there is potential of her using the pool, and so we would waive the costs associated with that, including any lifeguard fees that were necessary. There's a minimum $5,000 deposit for any damages or anything that can be asked of film productions, and we would waive that, mostly knowing what type of film it's supposed to be and the amount. It's driving up and down Main Street in one vehicle type thing. It's not a huge production. They're not setting fires on Main Street or blowing up the Empress Theater sign. It's a relatively small scale, correct. And then there is there would be a fire chief site meeting though for one of the scenes, and so we would like to waive also the fire chief's fees and cover those. That's our recommendation. Like I said, there is a sponsorship letter attached to there. Should council wish to donate cash to it, there is approximately $3,000, just between $3,000 and $4,000 left in the council donation and gift things. We've earmarked a little bit of that for the Christmas dinner, but there was $10,000 originally in that account, and about half goes towards the meal at Christmas time, and there's about $1,500, $1,600 that's already been spent on a few other items that council approved. If you're looking at making a cash donation, there is funds available still within that account. And then I believe that that's about all that we can recommend at this point without knowing much more of what she's needing until the time comes.
Very good. All right, anyone prepared to make a motion as per the recommendation? And if you wish anything extra? I had a quick question on the use of the video. Like, does the town, are we able to leverage or utilize the video when it's done, or how does that look? Because it could be quite a promotional video for the town form cloud per se, and I'm just wondering if that's something we can make use of, whether it's on our website or whether it's, or is that a separate discussion after the fact?
I think there would have to be a conversation with Natasha and her production team, and then legal to kind of see how that plays into it. We don't typically have anything else, like, so I'll use like Last of Us or Ghostbusters, for example. We can leverage it because they were filmed here, but we can't leverage the film. And so it's about saying that we were the shooting location for parts of it, but the film itself is another piece. There's royalties and such attached to it. With this being a small production, and there's probably not a production company attached to it, you know, it's not like Warner Brothers or something like that is doing it. It is a small production. She would probably have a little bit more leeway and ability to approve that. But I see that being a different kind of conversation once production kind of starts, or once it's finished, and kind of see where the film even goes.
Either way, our sponsorship would exceed the diamond sponsor amount, correct? Okay. Sorry, anyone prepared to make a motion on this item? Councillor Poitras, as per the recommendation. Any further discussion? No, I think it's a great opportunity, and I think she's been going around to a number of businesses as well to gain some support that way. I'm not sure what our target is. Well, I guess you can tell by the amount of available spots per sponsor. But that's a good opportunity. Motion is on the floor. If there's no further comments, we'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? And the motion is carried. And that is item 5. We have no reports, no in camera. We will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.